Hello, I'm Ellie Gold, the president of the Gold Institute for International Strategy, and this is the G2 podcast. I want to thank Shauna Forta, the Gold Institute's vice president of operations, for giving me the opportunity to fill in for her today. Over the past little bit, I've been certainly over the past week or so, we've seen a variety of different companies, social media companies, and others take action against those who supported President Trump. Now, this has gotten me thinking about something that I have been focused on for quite some time, and that is this idea of moving from a paper currency to an all-digital currency. The concern that we have at the Gold Institute, we always focus on things of national security and foreign policy issues or defense-related issues. But we begin to see in a very small way some of the threats that are posed by moving all digital. So today I am very pleased to have with us Congressman Keith Rothfus. Congressman Rothfuss was in Congress from 2013 through 2018. Spent three terms, and was sat on the banking committee in the House, and was also involved in the terrorism financing caucus in the House as well. So let me bring in Congressman Rothfuss, and let's begin our conversation.
Ellie, good to be with you today.
Good afternoon. How are you? It's been a while since we've spoken, but I think that this is really an issue of grave concern. As I mentioned in my intro, for the longest time, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's been at least 2 years now that people have been talking about moving away from cash and moving towards your credit cards and debit and other avenues of paying. We now have cryptocurrency, which is taking even a greater role now that people can actually go to Starbucks or wherever it may be, and in some cases pay with cryptocurrency. The concern that I have always had is what happens if Iran decides to use an EMP and takes down our grid, takes down the ISPs or internet service providers and so on. What happens if China or Russia or some other actor it hacks into some of these systems? So to me, where I have always been concerned about that and really been focused on it in the background, are now taking a look at and seeing what's happened to since last week's protests in Washington. Now, this is regardless of what side of the political aisle you sit on. The question, of course, becomes what if, in fact, you can have PayPal, as Bloomberg reports, that they canceled some services, the service of to an organization that brought people to Washington because they did not fit PayPal's political views. What is, if we move to an all digital currency, then what does somebody do, and what is stopping companies, whether it's Bank of America, Wells Fargo, or even PayPal, from not providing you the ability to bank? How do you go to the store? How do you go shopping? What is it? Am I thinking along the right lines? Am I overreacting? What's your perspective?
I think some of this is the after effect of what happened last week at the Capitol. To your earlier point, there's been a trend where more and more people are using digital means to pay, and that could mean any number of things, whether it's going to be your cryptocurrencies, the Bitcoins of the world, or just paying with a credit card. And certainly that's accelerated with COVID. I noticed that when you go into a store, a lot of people are using credit cards because of the concern that there might be COVID on cash dollars. So let's all use credit cards and keep it clean and avoid contact with anything that could be carrying a COVID germ. But a couple issues you talk about. You talk about an EMP attack. That's going to affect anything that's done digitally. And so I think we're going to have bigger problems than being able to pay with a credit card after an EMP, frankly. But when you look at groups like PayPal or other private sector companies making decisions on who would have access to their platform, that raises any number of issues. One, it seems to me that as investigations are underway to the extent that there was any criminal activity, financial transactions can be some footprints where investigators may want to follow. And it gets very complicated when a private sector company decides that they're going to exclude certain individuals from their services versus everybody. They're going to have to play by a set of rules that are going to be fair. We have non-discriminatory provisions out there in the law right now. The OCC just announced a rule on fair access to financial services. That was actually part of the Dodd-Frank law. There was a provision on access to financial services. And so I think companies got to be very careful as they navigate this environment that we find ourselves in now.
Let's go back for a moment, if we can, and let's talk about this idea of moving to an all digital currency without leaving politics out of it for a moment. From that sense, from your experience in the banking committees, is it what was the response to that? In other words, is this a positive thing? Is this a step forward? Is this one of concern to the committees as a whole?
We really didn't take a close look at moving to a completely digital kind of setup. I know there has been talk from time to time about our currency being, getting rid of the $100 bill, or having smaller denominations, having anything that's in larger denominations have to be by check or by digital, because there is a money laundering aspect there. You have bulk cash shipments that are going south of the border, for example. I've talked about this for years on the importance of securing the border. It's just not northbound flows that we're concerned about of trafficking in persons and drugs, but there's a lot of southbound flows of illicit cash. Bulk load of cash. And in the news over the last couple of months, you've heard stories about Border Patrol seizing hundreds of thousands of dollars that are going to the drug cartels. So to the extent that we were looking at it through that prism. Should we move towards a completely cashless society? Certainly, it would be very efficient to do that, but it raises any number of issues otherwise. I myself personally pay both by credit cards and by cash. I like to have a little bit of cash on hand from time to time, particularly when we have a snowstorm. You don't know if systems are going to go down, if the power is going to go out. You can't use your credit card. You want to have some cash. And over the last number of years, you've seen that happen when there's going to be a storm, that people run to the ATM. They make sure they have cash on hand if they need it.
Right. So this is I mean, a very, very interesting situation. If I want to, we'll come back to this, but I want to ask you, and again, this just so you understand, and for our viewers to understand, the way when I fill in here, I like to have a conversation rather than just an interview, shall we say. So we can go to any number of issues, and if you don't have any comments on it, feel free to say I just don't know. But as we look to expand into cryptocurrencies and alternative revenue systems that we have, what does that do? What ultimately does that do to the currency that we have? In other words, from a security perspective, as you talk about laundering, as you talk about trafficking, if for example, I have assets that are frozen, Is it possible? Are we now just creating a secondary economy?
Yeah, well, that's one of the issues that you have to look at when you start kicking people off of social media, or if you start excluding people from services that are public. Are they going to go to the so-called dark web, where it's going to be harder to see what people are doing? There are ways when you and I've seen this done in real time where investigations are going on. For example, with people moving bitcoins around, there is a way for law enforcement to take a look and try to track those flows and use that as evidence in court. Um, some cryptocurrencies are more easily to track than others, but certainly when you start to crush those or limit uh, the open platforms, you're going to drive people to the platforms that are harder to take a look at.
Right, and you have I saw that Russia and China are creating their own cryptocurrency. As you look towards to me, that is a cause of concern, I guess, because when you have a Biden administration, and listen, and I just so we're clear, this is the Gold Institute is a nonpartisan think tank that focuses on issues of national security and defense related matters, as well as foreign policy. But there's no doubt about it that the Biden administration has a better relationship with China, or let's put it this way, a different relationship with China than the Trump administration did. And this is certainly not a partisan discussion. The question, of course, becomes is, as we look to these alternative currencies, is this a cause of concern for you? If is what is this something that you would say, we need to take a secondary look at it, and how we can how that might influence our policies?
Well, there's again, that raises a number of issues, but with respect, you look at what happened to Bitcoin over the last couple of months and the way it just went through the roof. You got to look at our monetary and fiscal policy here in the United States. Look, when you create $4 trillion over the last year in response to COVID and the economic consequences of what happened, there's going to be a hangover from that. And there's this new monetary theory where you just keep on going forever. And the numbers that came out this week on fourth quarter spending, the most we've ever been spending, and the deficits that we're running, that's people are looking for a store of value. Well, and the cryptos really it begs the question: what is money? Is it a value for exchanging goods? It's something that we set. When you just have the Federal Reserve or the Treasury start creating money out of nothing, you're going to see inflation. We see inflation in asset prices. We see inflation in real estate. We see inflation in the market itself. To have the stock market at these levels, you only have that, I think, because of the massive infusion that you've had from the stimulus over the last year. So people are looking for, a hedge against some potential inflation coming down the pike. And if there's a limited number of Bitcoin, they're going to go to Bitcoin and think that that's going to have a better store of value.
It's very interesting. You make a very good point, because over the past year, everybody, well, I mean, as you know, for the past 15 years, I've been focused on other areas of the globe, including the Middle East. And I was talking to representatives from one of those countries, and I said, as you're looking for stability in your country, how has COVID and unemployment, has it hurt or not your country? And they said something very, very interesting. They said, as we're moving to create stability in our country, and we're creating this economy, we also have to you have to remember that we essentially have a dual economy. We have this gray economy, which is everything is under the table. People are working because before that's just the way they dealt with it, and now we're trying to bring some formality to our economy, to our banking, to our currency, and so on. So we really have a dual economy. We have a gray economy, and we also have the regular formal economy that we have. So therefore, people are not hurting as much as they may be hurting in other countries and other areas, which is a very interesting thing. The fear that I have with if we don't have a clear-cut policy is that we're ultimately going to have a dual economy. We'll have dual what's the word I'm thinking of, policies, whether it comes to one group of people versus another. We're creating a dual society here that we have right now, whether it's from alternative currencies, whether it is social media companies have one rule and way of working, while the standard sectors have another set of rules that they have to live by. If we take a look at what's happening to President Trump, for example, where social media, Facebook and Twitter have come down on them. You have PayPal. I think it's PayPal as well. But I could be wrong, so I'll take that back. So it's not PayPal, but you have New York City has said that they're going to be canceling all contracts with the Trump organization. We have we have dual policies and dual procedures in this country as we see it now. As we move farther away from the standard, from the norm, I fear that we're going to have we'll have two sets of rules, shall we say.
Well, take a look at the way that the New York canceled the contracts with the Trump organization. And I don't know how those contracts were entered, whether there was a competitive bid process for those contracts to be awarded. But it seems to me that those who run the city of New York would want to have the most efficient provider, the most cost-effective provider for those services. And so let's say that the Trump organization was being paid, I don't know, $5 million for a year for a particular service. Is there a competitor out there that can provide that service at $5 million or less? Or are they going to now go to a new provider that's going to actually charge the city more? So this is an issue, I think, that those who are in the public sector contracting, they want to be sensitive. You want to get the best value for the taxpayer's dollar that you're spending. The best services, the most efficient provider is, President Trump in his book, The Art of the Deal, talks about the Woman Rink story in Central Park, where for endless delays trying to get that ice skating rink put back together, and that Trump came in and did it in a matter of months, and lo and behold, there it was. Again, that's what the private sector is able to do. And so before people go around start canceling contracts, they should be looking at the cost of doing so. With respect to where the economy's at, there are parts of this economy that have just done incredibly well over the last year, and there are parts of the economy that have been devastated. It's very sad to see a lot of the restaurants in places like Pittsburgh, places that have been open for a long time, closed permanently. In New York, when I've been there over the last year on a couple of occasions, seeing the empty storefronts, the empty restaurants, it's going to take a very long time to bring those back. Anything related to the theater in New York, to see the devastation that's happened there with people's livelihoods. And so you have pockets of the economy that have done very well, other pockets that have not done so well. And then you've had these relief packages that Congress has provided, that President Trump has signed, Yeah, it's here we are looking at what happened last week and the impeachment vote this week. It's kind of odd that it took 6 months for Nancy Pelosi to get the second COVID relief package out to the American people, and she basically said she was waiting for after the election.
Right.
And yet here she proved that she could, if she wanted something done, she could do it quickly. To turn around an impeachment vote in 7 days without any hearings before the Judiciary Committee is even staffed, when the president has a week left in office. Again, just this raw exercise of political power that was not at the service of the people. When she holds off on relief to people that needed it for COVID, for example. But to answer your question about where the economy is going, pockets here, pockets there. I think I saw numbers today that Germany had a 5% decline related to COVID. Right. It's amazing to me that China continues to seem to do well, run by the communists, the way they're seeking every single leverage point advantage they can over us. How does that tie into the cryptocurrency world? You have other countries that are looking at crypto.
Right.
Is a central bank going to go over to a completely digital or cryptocurrency? How would it be different? If you have an unlimited supply, if you can have your central bank just create crypto the way we create regular dollars here, I don't see much difference, frankly. What's attractive about the Bitcoins of the world is there's a limited supply.
Right. What does this do? I know we have only 5 minutes left, but the fear that I have here, and maybe and we touched on it before, but the fear that I have here is that by creating a dual currency, that will devalue the dollar, increase the value of, as we said, of cryptocurrency, of Bitcoin or whatever it may be, and this goes back to, I'm not a globalist by any stretch of the imagination, far from it, but I do believe in that there is this idea of globalism, that we work and we rely on each other, which is how we got into this mess with China to begin with, that we've relied on them a lot. So I believe that there is, but for the longest time, the United Nations, Europe, the United Nations wanted to create a global currency, and what this cryptocurrency, by creating this new one, which, by the way, in full disclosure, I have no clue why cryptocurrency is worth any money to begin with, has any value to me. It's an Ellie Gold. The layman on this issue, it's like, what it appears to me that some guy woke up one day and said, I'm going to create a currency, and all of a sudden it now has value, which is great. And but that being said, the fear here is that it will devalue the dollar, and therefore will have a long-term negative impact on the U.S.
Well, with respect to, let's say, look at Bitcoin, for example. I don't own any cryptocurrencies. I don't own any Bitcoin. But there you have a community of individuals who have a trust in that system. It's not backed by the federal government the way the U.S. dollar is. There are people in the Bitcoin community who trust that when they purchase a Bitcoin or mine a Bitcoin, and that's how they get new Bitcoin. There are these algorithms out there, people running algorithms to find the Bitcoins that are out there, and then you have a Bitcoin, and then you can either sell it or hold on to it. And the price fluctuates. You've seen a tremendous run up in the price of Bitcoin, for example, over the last couple of months.
Correct.
Because those people evidently don't trust the dollar. They don't trust that the dollar is going to be worth anything. So it's a risky play for them, but any system requires trust. Any monetary system requires trust. And this is, I do have concerns about where we are at with respect to our fiscal situation in the United States. When I ran for Congress first in 2010, I think the national debt was around $12 trillion, and it was a big issue for me at that time, because under the Obama administration, the first 4 years, and the Democratic supermajority in the Congress, we were running trillion-dollar deficits, $1.4 trillion deficits in the aftermath of the financial crisis, and they came in and thought that you could solve everything out of Washington, D.C., and created what I would call, these anthropogenic or man-made headwinds in the economy, and we never saw the kind of growth that we should have seen. It was the slowest economic recovery since since the Great Depression.
Right.
And we really seem to have lost over the last couple of years the sense of fiscal discipline. We actually did achieve in 2012, 2013, some actual reductions in federal spending. But since then, budget deal after budget deal has broken the caps, and we're back to spending like crazy in Washington, D.C., which is not healthy for the long-term picture of the dollar. And as you look at China continuing to grow its economy, we're still fortunate that the dollar is the reserve currency.
Right.
But if you keep on just turning on the printing press, and we'll see what the Biden administration is going to be able to accomplish with a Democratic Congress now, with respect to new stimulus coming online, and how many more hundreds of billions of dollars are going to be spent and borrowed from the future.
Right. So let me. I know that I told you we said 1:30 to 2, but I am going to keep you for 5 more minutes if I may.
Right.
And I just have 2 questions for you, and I just want to hear what your thoughts are on them. We've talked about for so many years until President Trump came into office. We've talked about everybody being Reagan conservatives. In Congress, everybody was a Reagan conservative. I'm not a Republican. I'm a Reagan conservative. And as we look to these COVID stimulus packages, and I'm not, and again, and there are many people who need this stimulus. They cannot pay their rent. They can't put food on their tables, and I completely understand that. So I'm specifically talking about Congress now. I'm not talking about COVID or anybody else. What happened to the Reagan conservatives? The strong conservatives in Washington that we know, they seem to be gone. They seem to say, you know what, we have no problem passing this bill. Or we might have a problem with it, but we're willing to get along, because we want to make sure that everybody has this. What happened to the Reagan conservatives? Have they moved to be Trump conservatives, which is limited government but also large spending? Or what are your thoughts on this based on your time in Congress? I'm looking at it from.
No, there are still Reagan conservatives there, and you can find them by taking a look at who votes against the omnibus bills. It's very simple. Fundamentally, Congress is a broken institution. And this was an issue I talked about every single year when these omnibuses came down the pike. And nowadays, it's worse than when I was there. Everything is packaged in the Speaker's office. It's brought to the floor with no opportunity for amendment. This deal in December, that was 5,000 pages long, and they had 6 hours, literally 6 hours to take a look at it before they voted on it. That's completely reckless, completely irresponsible. You have to be deliberative in the spending. They're not. And so you had a situation over the last few years where you had this deal between defense hawks who wanted to spend more money on defense, and then the Democrats demanding more money to be spent on social programs. And so they repeatedly broke the caps. This goes back, again, 5-6 years now. And you can track every 2 years, there's a new budget deal. And then they package everything together at the last minute. There's no zero-based budgeting. We just take what the government wants. And I suggested in 2016 as one of the reasons people should have voted for Donald Trump, looking at policy. And I said, maybe Donald Trump will force Congress to become more fiscally responsible by vetoing one of these omnibus bills. Unfortunately, President Trump never did. And so it's going to take a president who wants to see Congress do its job. I don't think that's going to happen with the Biden administration. They'll cut the big deals. They'll bring to the floor. It'll get passed. But as far as you're a member of Congress being able to offer an amendment to either eliminate a program or to increase the funding for a program if you think it's essential for your district, that's not going to happen. And so your member becomes a potted plant and is expected to vote with the way the leadership wants them to vote. And that's not the way to legislate. That's not government of, by, and for the people.
Right, and I wait for I wait for the Capra-esque Mr. Smith to come back to Washington. And the final question I have for you, and this is, I just want to get your take on it as you sat in Congress, and that is this relationship between Democrats and Republicans today. Is it possible to create an environment where they can work together, or are we now going to look at multiple parties? And it used to be the famous the go-to example that everybody uses is Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, where Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill have dinner one night at the beginning of his term, and they get along fabulously. And then the next day, President Reagan opens up the newspaper and he sees Tip O'Neill saying that he's an idiot. And he calls him up and says, what's going on here? I thought we were friends. He says, yes, we're friends, but not 9 to 5. That's work. This is different. We don't see that today. And in fact, Nancy Pelosi is talking about the need to impeach President Trump again, because of the rhetoric that he used, which was inciting riots and inciting violence. Maybe yes, maybe no. That's that I'll let I am neither judge nor jury. However, it was Nancy Pelosi who made similar comments, and Maxine Waters who made similar comments, and so on. And theirs could arguably, in many cases, be worse than some of the things that President Trump did. The results of what their comments were certainly worse than what President Trump did. Although this is just my cynicism speaking, because the violence and destruction was in the Capitol where members of Congress work, it's bad. But on the streets of New York City or Portland or somewhere else, it's okay. Will we ever see, in your viewpoint, a time where Congress can come back together and be morally civil to each other in their processes? I'm not suggesting that Nancy Pelosi and Louis Gohmert have to agree on a 10-point manifesto, but will they ever be able to work together?
I think that remains to be seen. I mean, there is a qualitative difference of what happened last week when you had the seat of the legislative branch come under attack versus a riot in a commercial business district. Neither is acceptable, but there is a difference when you have the seat of the government. You have elected representatives within feet of violence that's taking place. But the rhetoric, and I don't want to be accused of whataboutism or this, but there is an issue here with respect to, you look at just last summer, Nancy Pelosi herself talking in response to a question about a mob that was tearing down statues. People are going to do what they're going to do. There was a culture of violence, a culture of lawlessness that we saw develop last summer, looking what happened with the CHOP zone in Seattle, looking at Portland, the repeated attacks on the federal courthouse there, and Democrats refusing to call out the violence that was happening. We've been consistent, and Republicans have been, in denouncing violence of any sort, whether it was at the Capitol last week, whether it was happening last summer. But you look at this rhetoric that has been out there, and it's not been 4 years with President Trump. I trace the modern acerbic rhetoric, frankly, back to Teddy Kennedy and his attack on the character of Robert Bork in 1987. And again, you've seen this harsh rhetoric coming from the left for decades. President Trump, frankly, picked up the way the Democrats spoke, and this was a difference from Reagan Republicans, the Reagan conservatives, where we were always trying to be winsome the way Ronald Reagan was. I was always very measured and careful in the rhetoric I would use, trying to pull as many people in as possible, because I believe in what this country is all about. Opportunity for everybody, regardless of who you are, where you came from. So for things to get better in the long term, I think that there needs to be some substantial reforms within Congress itself, how Congress does business, because again, right now you're driven to social media, you're driven to the cable shows, because you're not allowed to legislate. You're not allowed to offer an amendment. You're not allowed to try to convince 218 of your colleagues that your amendment is worth voting for. So what do? You churn up social media, you churn up, or you run over to MSNBC or Fox News or CNN, wherever it is that you're going to have your platform, so that your people back home can see that you're fighting, but you're not accomplishing anything. You're going to end up having a massive bill that you're going to have very little input on, if any. And then you're expected to vote one way or the other, depending on what party you're in. That's not the way to legislate. We need a much better process where people need to be far more iterative in what they're doing. Otherwise, you cede all the power to the leadership and the leadership staffs. And I think your people back home can say, well, yeah, you're on TV a lot, but you voted for that big bill, but did you get this particular piece done?
What have you done for me lately? Exactly right. Exactly right. So I want to thank you, Congressman Rothfuss, for joining us today. I think that we had a great conversation. I believe, though, to be honest with you, this is going to be we just touched the surface, and this is going to be a conversation that we're going to have continue time and time again. But with that, I want to thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to our next conversation. I look forward to seeing you back in Washington, and sometime soon we'll be working again together like we did while you were on the Hill.
Good talking with you, Ellie.
Same here. Thank you.
Bye-bye.